Let's talk about this. The Pope dies, and the President of the United States decides the best thing he could possibly do is go to social media and post an AI image of himself as Pope. It's pretty ridiculous. But there's kind of a lot to unpack there, right? First of all, a lot of people are saying, well, that's really, really disrespectful. It's kind of disparaging to people of the Catholic faith. And that may be true. It's quite possible it's true. But there's a lot of humor that goes around. And not every single bit of humor that happens is trying to undermine its target. We could make fun of the president. That doesn't mean that we're being disrespectful to him. We could make a joke about a figure in the Catholic Church, and that doesn't mean automatically that the joke is necessarily trying to be disrespectful to members of the Catholic faith. So in that sense, you could say, well, it is what it is. I mean, and it's true. As J.D. Vance said in a response when someone asked him about it, he himself identifying as a Catholic, he said, well, I'm more concerned with things like wars that kill people than a meme that's being shared around. That's also a valid point. It's totally plausible to say that we get ourselves all fired up over something which really isn't doing any intrinsic harm or harm to anyone, while we're also being kind of indifferent to things that perhaps actually do cost people's lives. But that being said, it's also a little bit different if the President of the United States posts an irreverent meme, and if I share it with a couple of my friends. Right after the Pope died, it was really easy to spread a lot of jokes around about J.D. Vance killing the Pope. Now, did J.D. Vance kill the Pope? No, he didn't kill the Pope. But certainly the irony of J.D. Vance having a photo of himself with the Pope the day before the Pope dies, which is a real thing, had a certain poetic irony to it. So jokes are made, and that is what it is. The real issue that I see here, and the reason why I think it's worth talking about and dissecting a little bit deeper, is because the office of the president, the office of the head of state in any country, needs to be disciplined, and it needs to follow a specific cadence that accentuates the fact that it is not about the person in the role. It's about honoring the importance of the role itself. And what we see when Donald Trump posts something like that is ultimately narcissism. It's the desire to take something which is known to be a somber event for many people around the world, and to make it, on the part of Mr. Trump, about himself. And more specifically, it's not even trying to garner him positive PR in some sort of a way. it seems to be indicative of a desire to just get attention. That's, after all, why we make and share memes, isn't it? To get attention. Not because we're trying to get people to agree with us, not because we're trying to convey an important message, just because we want attention. And so it would seem, as Trump is wont to do, he wants attention. And he doesn't really care if it's positive attention or negative attention. He doesn't care if it is on a government account or on a personal one. At the end of the day, he just wants attention. That's what he feeds off of. Seeing his name at the top of a newspaper. But what kind of leadership comes from that type of attitude, that type of character? Is it the type of leadership that would, say, crash the economy and think it's fun to watch the world burn as long as it gets your name at the top of the news headlines? Someone who just feeds off of getting attention and doesn't really care about the good or the bad or the implications of their actions, other than hoping that it will get them more exposure and make more people think and talk about them. That's not the kind of leadership which ever leads to good things in any organization, least of all a nation. So where does that lead us? Where does it leave us? It puts us in a place where we can't really take our own government seriously. Even if you're in the camp of saying you're not against Trump, and I am in that camp. I'm not an anti-Trump person. I voted for Trump. That doesn't mean that I support everything he does, and it doesn't mean that I wouldn't support his opposition if I felt like they were a better choice. In a few years, it'll be time for elections again, and the more I see of this sort of behavior, the more likely I would be as a voter to say it's important for us to remove the incumbent and put someone else into the role who will take it more seriously and have a more presidential approach to the office they represent. We should always do the things we do with the intention of service, not just of getting attention. And we should also care about how it makes other people feel. Even if you're in the right, even if you have the permission to do something and there's no conflict of interest, nothing intrinsically wrong with it, there's still times when you just shouldn't do something. You shouldn't say something because you know it's going to be contentious in a way that could result in people misinterpreting your motives. That's very important when you're in a position of leadership. Now, I'm pretty sure if a lot of these shenanigans that Trump has been doing, things like what we're talking about today, were done in, say, a workplace by a executive, they would be criticized and they would result in people being disciplined or perhaps removed from role. Not because they're extremely bad, but just because they're erratic actions that would be seen as risking shareholder value and risking the image of the business. So if we can have this attitude of caution in the corporate world, we can have, even in our personal lives, perhaps, the knowledge that it's not a good idea to make jokes at a funeral, then why can't we have it in the highest office of our nation? It concerns me that there's so many people on both sides of the fence that refuse to acknowledge what appears to be the truth. When we had Joe Biden running for president, there were a lot of people who refused to acknowledge the fact that we never even saw Joe Biden. He was seemed to be an old man in decline who was not participating in the business of being the president. And people who wanted to be pro-Joe would certainly go out of their way to ignore that. And now we also see the same basic thing on the other side of the fence. We see the conservatives that are Trump worshiping, and they are going to be extremely pro-Trump no matter what he does. It doesn't matter if he does things that are disrespectful, if he does things that are ridiculous and unfitting of a president. Doesn't matter if the country is in a worse condition than it was before. They will, if it's their side that's in office, they will ignore all of those red flags and say, well, I don't see anything wrong. But if it was the other side doing it, then no doubt their tune would change. Now that does lead me to one more question that I have on my mind. When I think about the president, I think, there's a lot of things going on. If you're the president of the United States, doesn't matter who you are. It's a busy, busy life. So, where does Trump get time to make all of these memes? Or does he? And that's another question. Because Donald Trump is, again, a very old president and a very busy man. So a lot of the things that happen, a lot of the things that are published that supposedly came from him on an official account aren't necessarily things that he personally created or wrote. It's entirely possible that the Trump as the Pope AI generated image was simply a 20-year-old intern making content and posting it on the White House page because that's their job and they don't really care one way or the other. They're just having a laugh. That would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? Certainly possible. And that brings up the question of how much you can really believe what you see on the internet. And it also ties in well with the question of the role AI plays in our online experiences. Because there's so many times now where AI image generation is getting more easy to use, more widespread, and there's more instances of people being imposters on the internet and things being created which don't necessarily represent the truth, but at face value they can look very much like they do. The internet is becoming an increasingly deceptive place. I think that that's also something that's going to be a growing concern as we move into an era when AI is going to get more pervasive and it's going to probably get better. And there's going to be more of an urge to outsource things to agents of various sorts, whether they be human ones or AI ones, which are tasked with representing the the people behind them. So you could have an AI agent that's creating content representing the president. You can have someone who isn't the president representing the president by managing a social media page. Regardless of how it all plays out, one of the greater problems, as I see it, is the social media age making its way into serious spaces. I remember feeling a little bit concerned when I saw Barack Obama having more of an online social media presence. It made him feel hip and young and new and relatable. That was great. But it also made him seem just slightly less presidential. And that trend continued with Trump. And it seems to have no signs of letting up. Presidents now have just as much of a social media presence as anyone else. Back when that wasn't the case, it was a lot more plausible that somebody could tell a joke to a few people, and maybe it wouldn't make its way around the world. But now everyone has a mouthpiece, and it seems to be the case that a lot of people, regardless of their age, don't really grow up. I remember when I started my job working for Walmart, I was an hourly associate, and I worked with a lot of people who didn't really care too much about their jobs. They were just there to work at Walmart, and they just didn't take it too seriously because, you know, people that work at the grocery store tend not to take their jobs too seriously. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be nice to move up, work my way up in the organization, and then eventually I would be able to surround myself with a different sort of people. People who are more professional. People who have a passion for things like the company's legacy and merchandising and things of that nature. But then as I moved up in the organization, I realized that as you move up, people tend to perhaps play politics a little bit more. But underneath that veneer, they're just about as immature and short-sighted as the people beneath them. That's not to say that somewhere there aren't people who are passionate and driven by the right motives. It's just, unfortunately, human nature doesn't really change. It's just, in some cases, people get better at hiding it. These days, though, sometimes it seems like people don't even try to hide it anymore. Everyone sort of just does whatever comes to mind. And I can't help but thinking about that meme that goes around that weak men create hard times. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. And again, weak men create hard times. And so there is that cycle. Perhaps this is the end of the good times for our society, when the President of the United States feels like the best thing for him to do is to make an AI image of himself as the Pope, as his contribution to the world when the Pope dies. Something to think about. Not even quite sure what I make out of it. other than in a world where a lot of people do things which are perhaps undisciplined or unprofessional or impolite, it becomes more important for us as individuals to hold ourselves to a higher standard and to stop so easily saying other people in higher roles have to hold themselves to a higher standard. But as for me, it doesn't really matter what I do or what I say. We all have a duty of stewardship to uphold values which are respectable. And as easy as it is to say, if I share something or say something stupid and off the cuff, it's not a big deal because I'm just sharing it with a small group. The truth is, when we don't do the right thing when it comes to small things, if we ever become stewards of greater things, then we will continue to have those same behaviors, just at a higher level. So let's work on being good stewards of our own lives and being respectful and well-mannered in all of the things that we do. As always, best of luck on your adventure. Till next time, thanks so much for watching.